와, 윌슨 그 다이너마이트 들어봤어요? 나이나이나이나이나이나이나이.
네. 예.
부를 줄 알아요? 나중에 우리 같이.
예.
안녕하세요. 오늘 어필, 필이 좋은 어필. 지난번에 제가 이미그레이션 네이션이라는 넷플릭스에 나온 웰메이드 다큐멘터리를 한번 소개해드렸는데 6부작으로 된 다큐멘터리인데요. 첫 번째는 공포를 퍼뜨린 자들, 이미그레이션 로를 위반했다라는 사실만 있으면 크리미널 케이스와 연관이 있든 없든 다 체포할 수 있는 상황이 되어서 오늘은 특별히 미국 변호사로서 또 인권에 깊은 관심이 있고 우리와 좋은 관계를 갖고 있는 지금 세종에서 일하고 계신 어토니 윌슨을 모시고 다큐멘터리 그냥 소개하는 게 아니라 좀 그 안에서의 우리가 생각하고 대화할 부분들을 조금 미국과 한국의 차이라든지 미국에서 지금 진짜 일어나고 있는 일이 어떤 일인지를 제가 사실 잘 모르는 부분들이 있기 때문에 윌슨에게 좀 질문을 해보려고 합니다. 이 조금 한국말로 하다 윌슨이 한국말을 너무너무 잘하시지만
아직까지 영어도 편합니다. 예. 아직까지 모국어 조금 더 편하긴 하죠. 예. 저 와이프랑 우리 넷플릭스 자주 보고 다큐멘터리 이런 뭐 이미그레이션 네이션처럼 그 다큐멘터리 있고 그래서 그런 거 많이 보고 그리고 이제는 K-드라마도 넷플릭스 많이 왔으니까 맞아. K-드라마도 제가 한국말 연습하기 위해서는 조금 보고 있어요. 부부의 세계나 도깨비나
도깨비도 왔어요?
네네네. 아직도 보고 있어요 도깨비. I would say that I think as an American the first feeling that comes to my mind is shame, embarrassment. It is quite shocking to see the treatment that our government kind of forwards to a lot of people who want to come into the country lawfully, people that have every right to try to immigrate into our country in the way that they are treated. I think the documentary was made for the reason that most people don't realize that sort of activity is going on, not just at the Mexico-American border, but actually inside the country as well. The documentary is very in-depth, very, they got permission at the very beginning to follow ICE officers in their day-to-day work. So I think that was really good insight. Of course, not easy to watch, right? I think that's the whole point of the documentary, is that it's supposed to make you uncomfortable because these are realities that as human beings, it's hard to see. It's hard to watch other human beings being treated that way. So I think the very, very first episode, for those of you who are thinking about watching, I guess I should give you fair warning. The very first episode is, I think, one of the more shocking episodes. And it kind of explains the, spoiler alert, I suppose. I'll try to give a summary without giving too much away. But the very first episode basically talks about, since 9/11, what happened with the formation and transformation of the Department of Homeland Security, which before, when we were talking about immigration before 9/11, immigration wasn't really politicized. There was a law, and people followed that law, and you came in and out. And of course, even before 9/11, many people wanted to come to America, but it wasn't politicized as much. After 9/11, there was a lot of what we call othering, right? Practices of making myself feel more comfortable by making other people into the enemy, whatever that means. Unfortunately, a lot of it had to do with race, and then on top of that, immigration. And so the first episode deals with a department of the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, called ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, that has turned into this pseudo police force that is basically there to expedite the deportation of people that are in America illegally. The documentary is really great because it talks about what does being an illegal immigrant actually really mean. Administration to administration, the laws change, executive orders change. The line of what it means to be an illegal immigrant now is so blurred that most people themselves are unaware of whether the fact they came here legally or not. You have the deferred action childhood arrival plan, people who came when they were 3 years old with their parents. They have no idea. They've been living in America. Their first language is English. They've been educated in schools, but they themselves, under this new administration, have become illegal. So you kind of follow around the ICE and people who basically are acting as police officers, pretending to be police officers, going around without warrants, without any actual right to go into these people's homes, pretend to be police officers, get access to people's homes, and essentially what you see in the first episode is, before your very eyes, the breakup of families, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Breakup and separation of families, whether it's people who are already living in America, and then, you know, the first episode as well talks about, of course, during the recent Trump administration, one of his first things that he did was to kind of send a message separating children at the border as well, right? If you came with your parents, you put the kids in a jail and you put the parents in a separate jail, which was, at the time, unthinkable, the fact that Americans could do that. That was so blood-boiling. That was definitely a huge issue a couple years ago when it took place. But to be honest with you, I had almost even forgotten that it had happened. There's so many things that have happened, not just in terms of immigration, but in terms of American politics, even in the last 2 years, that is so hard to keep track of it all. And then you see it again and you're reminded of the horrors that the American government inflicted upon all of these families, separating children, putting them in prisons. You know, you're talking about babies, like 2-3-year-old kids by themselves in prisons for, you know, extended periods of time, almost, you know, some cases 6 months, 7 months, extreme cases.
Actually, I was quite shocked at the first episode also. I didn't remember exactly, but I was quite shocked by the ICE officers' attitude towards some immigrants, because as I remember, some scene recording the babies is crying at the detention center, and then some ICE officer said, "Wow, it's like a harmony or symphony." It looks like very weird that ICE officers doesn't respect the migrants as a kind of human, or
right. I think that's the documentary does a really good job portraying the perspective from the ICE officers themselves. If you are an ICE officer, the actual job that you are asked to carry out in the grand schematics of the system is very small, right? You have one task, and you are being told that that task is for the benefit of your nation. What a very proud position. I'm working for my government, you know, and I am proud to be a citizen of America working for the national government, right? That's kind of the way that they portray themselves, ICE officers. But when you move all of those small parts together and you realize, I mean, there are tens of thousands of people that make this immigration system operate, all of those pieces put together, I mean, you are inflicting terror upon not just the American people, but you know, legal immigrants as well, right? And I think that's the big thing that the document points out, is that, you know, people have, it's called cognitive dissonance, right? It's easier for me to believe a lie that is comfortable than a truth that is uncomfortable, right? And you see the officers when you're in these ride-alongs, hey, it's just, you know, I'm just doing my job here. Like, I'm just doing my job.
Very proud.
I have my own family. I just have to do my job, right? I'm doing it for my country. And most people aren't really exposed to the realities of the pain that they really inflict, right? And I thought that was the best part of the documentary, is that you meet people from all parts of the process, right?
Yeah,
you meet people at the border. You meet people who are doing the work from the inside. And from their perspective, they might know that what they're doing isn't completely moral, but, you know, gotta eat, right? Everybody's gotta eat. Everybody's gotta serve their families, right? I'm just doing my job. Which of course is very a noble principle, but when put together, which is what this documentary did so well, you really see in its full light the kind of terror that the Department of Homeland Security, specifically ICE, is inflicting upon all of these people.
For me, it is very impressive that some citizens fight against ICE crackdown, and then they made a demonstration. ICE is very bad, do not deport our neighbor, that kind of things. And it is not usual in Korea, that kind of demonstration and anti-deportation protest like that. So that kind of press conference and that kind of things are very impressive for me.
I mean, yeah, the documentary, there are a few episodes when you see people protesting, whether it was the separation of children at the border or it was the policies of ICE that were, separating families in America. People were very much protesting against ICE, and I think there's comparing it to Korea, like why you don't really see people up in arms about those types of issues. I mean, granted, it might not be on the scale to which ICE is doing, the types of deportations that might happen in Korea. But I think the reason that there are differences, there's not one, there's multiple. But I think the first is that it's more, I'll say it again, out of sight, out of mind, right? If you don't see that individual being processed or being taken away from that family, you don't really know how to think of it as an important issue. So in America, immigrants are much more embedded within our communities, especially that instance of DACA, right, Deferred Action Childhood Arrival. These are people who, could have been my childhood friend. We went to school together, and all of a sudden, you're taking this person away for a reason that I don't understand. And there's that emotional element of, individuals who have become staples of the community now are being taken out, and that has an impact around for everyone, right? And so I think that is one of the reasons that people are more aware of the policies and their impact and the human rights violations that are taking place, thus the protests. I also think that in America, immigration has just been a political issue for longer. In Korea, there aren't really a lot of politicians who, one way or the other, want to really make immigration an issue. I mean, of course, you do see some politicians very briefly speak about ways to keep immigrants out, but I think Korea is in this very interesting position where the politically safe decision is to just not mention immigrants at all. There are actually a lot of people who vote in Korea who are actually very, very dependent on immigrant labor. And if you actually go forth and ask those people of their opinion, they would speak probably in a very positive sense of those migrants. Maybe people more in the cities, people who are struggling for jobs, maybe they think a little more negative. But I think from a politician's perspective in Korea, it's very hard to understand what the Korean voter thinks of immigration, and so it's just a non-issue. I don't think it's as much in the forefront. Whereas in America, it's very easy to separate where people think about immigration, right? Especially you see who we have as president right now. Everyone knows that Trump's big thing is to create fear within the United States that immigrants are not only here to take our jobs, but they're here to murder us, right? That's this rhetoric that Trump has been pushing on everyone. Immigrants are dangerous, they will kill you.
These are animals. They're coming into our country. They're not people. These are animals. Violent criminals, illegal aliens. Dangerous criminal, illegal immigrants. What was the name? Animals.
Just this nonsensical, but very much playing into a political narrative that he knows that people do believe, unfortunately, right? And it's not just Trump. People who have been against immigration for political reasons, it's been in our system since the era of Bill Clinton. And I think it's very easy to separate on political lines. Okay, pro-immigrant, you're going to be on this side, anti-immigrant this side, and I think that's why you see it more in the news. Whereas in Korea, like I said before, Korean politicians are a little confused as to what the electorate, the actual people here, think about the issue.
This kind of changes, system changes, cause a difference in how government actually views immigration issues.
Correct. And I think, unfortunately, yeah, you can talk about, like I mentioned before, the immigration systems were non-political. And I think you see that it's become such a politicized system that even the people who have already been granted access, I think episode 5 is a really good example of, there are refugees who, very plain to see, refugees. They've gotten status in America, but then the current administration has made it so difficult for them to lawfully bring over their own children.
Yeah.
Right? We have now a line of thousands of refugees who are waiting to be refugees who have been accepted into the United States, but have yet to be reunited with their family, which is a lawful process that, you know, when I was working as a practicing attorney in DC, and I had clients who, a number who they would already had received their status, and all my job is to fill out the paperwork to reconnect them. That's not political. There's no reason that issue should become more politicized than it already is, right? You have people who have been granted refugee status. The law says that you can connect these people with your family. Why are we throwing more obstacles at that individual? Of course, you know, refugee applicants, asylum seekers, people who want to get into the system, right? People who want to be recognized as refugees, right? They've always had an uphill battle. But now to think that people that we already recognize as refugees are now being exposed to the harassment, and essentially all it is a message, right? It is the American administration trying to send a message that, yeah, okay, we have this law that says you can come here legally, but we're gonna make it really difficult on you to actually come here and to live via, you know, whatever the laws say. We're gonna make it difficult so as to inspire you to go somewhere else. And similarly, you know, I mean, I think every country, Korea included, you have these very nuanced pieces within the legislation themselves, which kind of serve as, you know, pieces of, we call them disincentives, right? An incentive is a reason to do something, a disincentive is the opposite, right? So there are disincentives embedded in these pieces of legislation. The Korean refugee law has them as well. We don't really want to make it comfortable for you while you are applying for refugee status, so maybe go look somewhere else.
It's
so
kind of signal, yeah.
Right. That's the strategy, that's the thinking, and of course, the documentary, as you see it happening, myself as an American, you're disgusted because we fought so extremely hard to put these systems into place in the first place, and to now to see that they are slowly but surely being taken apart. It's infuriating, rather. You know, the fact that people who are already have legal access are now actually being harassed as well.
That kind of things was mentioned repeatedly to the ICE officers. If you follow the law, there will be no problem. But why you didn't follow law? I think the immigration officer in Korea, they have the same attitude. But the laws, discretion is very big, huge, and their discretion is very huge, and the legal and illegal is very vague, actually.
Yeah, I think in Korea as well, you know, it's every bureaucracy has the same setup. You have many moving parts who are actually in their everyday jobs doing something very small. But in the grand schematics of things, the amount of change that they are inflicting upon people's lives is very big. So in Korea, you have people who might not necessarily understand the transformation of what the law used to represent to what it represents now and the changes that have taken place since then, but they're given a directive to say, this is what your job is, and these, you know, your job responsibilities come from the law, which for most people would be enough to do your job. Oh, the law says that I should do this? Well, of course I feel justified to carry out my actions. I don't necessarily blame the ICE officers themselves or the immigration officers. I think it's wrong to vilify individuals on that kind of basis. The bigger problem lies within the policymakers, the people who are making those decisions to change the system. The individuals are just doing what they are told. And of course, if you're told that what you're doing is corroborating with the law, it's very easy, that's that cognitive dissonance, what I was saying before, to ignore whatever pain that might be pulling at your heartstrings, whatever pain that you're inflicting. Well, I'm just following the law here.
How could you do that? How could you do this? How could you remove people? As harsh as it may sound, the government didn't hire me for my moral views.
And I think in Korea, very few people have an understanding of what the actual laws say now, much less what they said 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or, you know, the actual policies of not just for refugees, but the employment permit system and the ways in which immigrant laborers come in and out of the country. I don't think people understand not just what that law is or how it's transformed, but the ways in which people are depended on within the Korean economy on foreign labor. I mean, all of those issues are not in the consciousness, and thus it makes it very easy for somebody to say, well, just follow the law. Well, just do as the law says. But this documentary does a really good job of showing there is so much context that goes into what the law is now, what the law was now, and for you as an individual to try to finagle and navigate your way between that can be very, very difficult. And for somebody who has no understanding of that transformation from the other side looking in, we very easily say, well, you're just illegal. Right? That title we give people, illegal, right? It gives justification to deport people at the drop of a hat. Well, of course, you are illegal. But actually asking yourself that question, how did this person get to that point? And is that really fair? Are we actually thinking about those proceedings, that label that we put on somebody? How did somebody get to be this illegal person? And I think the documentary really, really asks its viewers, think about that question before you automatically say, well, that person is illegal, so the fact that they're gone is safer for my country. Think about the process that led you to say that. So.
What kind of attitude it would be better?
On the basis of, in general, how the world operates, the Korean response was very drastic and extreme. But I don't think within the Korean communities themselves, I don't think people realized that. And I don't blame the people for reacting that way. I think the big thing is, we shouldn't be angry that somebody holds this particular type of emotion. We should try to be as logical as possible and try to understand where that comes from. Where does that anger of going to protest and asking the government to get rid of the refugee law or to kick out all of for example the Yemeni refugee applicants in Jeju, where does that anger really come from? And it's the same everywhere. It comes from a place of fear. It comes from a place of lack of empathy, which comes from just lack of understanding and lack of face time. I think the big thing in Korea from my time living here, I lived in Gwangju for quite a long time. And Gwangju is still not a really great example of this, but the point is that most of the migrant populations are very invisible in Korea. They're supposed to be, the idea is that migrant communities are invisible everywhere, even in the States, but particularly so in Korea. Most of Koreans live in a very urbanized setting. The megacity movement, it's not just here, but all of mostly Southeast Asia and East Asia, everybody wants to live in the city. It's a very, there's an ideal that living in the city is so wonderful and so great. But as a byproduct of that, you have two different communities that are living completely separate from each other. I think the idea that you mentioned before in the interview about people going into the streets and protesting on behalf of immigrants that they might not know comes from the fact that those immigrants are a part of the community, right? We can actually feel that we all contribute to making our community better, making our society better. And of course, every immigrant, I can't speak for every single immigrant, but the majority of people who have had their homes taken away from them and have been forced to go to somewhere else to start a new life, all they want to do is contribute to a new society, right? And be a contributing member. But that narrative doesn't get a lot of face time in Korea because of the fact that we live so separate. So I think the idea is that A, we live so separate so we can't really understand the perspective of migrants. B, the population is such a minor percentage. It's something like 1.8 million, which is only around 3% of the entire Korean population, most of that 3% living in the countryside. So I think, as the numbers continue to rise in Korea, we will have no other choice but to interact with these with immigrants more in our communities.
Sure.
But I think as well, it's good to before you just namelessly tell somebody to get out of your country, think about their situation, think about them as a human being as well. That's really where empathy starts from, and it's really important not to call people right-wingers or extremists, because those individuals in their hearts also feel like they have a very real reason to think that way, albeit I might disagree with them. But it's really important that we actually listen to what people are saying and think of solutions rather than trying to shame individuals for thinking that way. There's a reason that people are going to protest, and albeit even if their logic might be flawed to us, it's really important for us to listen and try to find solutions so that we can kind of move forward peacefully.
Wow. It was so great speech. I just thought that the final question was very brief question, but you gave us so great insight. It was
아,
so
완전
nice.
미국 사람이네요. 얘기 너무 많이 한 거 아니에요? 아이고.
오랜만에 영어 터졌어.
솔직히 저 수라쟁이 있어가지고 예 죄송합니다. 예 뷰어들이 예 진심으로 죄송합니다.
Yeah. Thank you for Wilson's comment and. Yeah, if you want to see this kind of great footage in our YouTube footage more, please subscribe our channel and then please
subscribe
and like and share. Okay, bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.